welcome everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Good Anime Palette Podcast. This is episode number 103. I am your co-host, Jason. Joining me, as always, as usual, is Will over here. I would first like to wish everybody a happy April Fool's Day, because this should be coming out on April 1st. But the joke is not on you. The joke is on us this time, because we are actually going to talk about the comedy genre.
I thought it was a bit of a joke, too, that I was looking at the docket and the dates are wrong. So I think you're still living in 2024.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways,
but
welcome,
it is.
yeah.
But it would come out on April 1st, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
This will come out on April 1st, 2025.
Yeah.
So lo and behold, it's about time that we go back into a genre analysis. Now, we haven't done these in a long time, simply because we kind of covered, a pretty wide spectrum of it, from action to horror to romance and whatnot. We've kind of hit a lot of the big ones that, everybody is attuned to, knows all about it, or, is a big fan of. But one that we never did, and is probably the biggest genre within anime, is comedy.
Yeah. It's our white whale, in the sense that we have thought about doing a comedy genre breakdown analyses for like forever, but we have put it off, obviously, until now. And you might sort of be wondering, like, why did we put it off? I think we will get into that as we will kind of talk about the genre, obviously, and how it kind of influences anime and manga. But one thing I do want to sort of say right off the bat is that, like, these these genre breakdowns, the reason why we're kind of slowing it down is because there's not a lot of it's finite, right? So, like, we did horror already. We did
We've done fantasy. We've done action,
isekai. We've done
romance,
a lot
as well.
of tags. Yeah. So at some point we're
gonna start talking about vampires and shit.
And we haven't done the mecha thing yet.
No,
okay.
Which we need reinforcements for that one. I don't think we alone can handle such a behemoth of a genre, of a theme.
So when it came down to this genre breakdown for comedy, Will and I kind of went several ways, and then went back this way and then that way. Basically, we couldn't really nail exactly how we're going to structure this episode. So I think, though, at some point, Will and I kind of landed on where, this episode that we're going to do now. But we're really not going to talk that much about name-dropping animes. We will name-drop in the sense that we will touch upon a lot of anime and mangas. I mean, we just have to. We need to. But we're not necessarily recommending shows as much as talking about the genre in general. And I think instead of saying, like, for our high school episode, or like for a horror, take our horror episode, for example, we talk about like body horror, like different subgenres of horror. I think in this case, it might be more interesting or more poignant, I guess, to talk about kind of like talking points of anime and manga comedy.
Sort of to help understand, like, the use of comedy in anime and manga, like what its purpose is, and also why the fact that it's probably the most tagged genre for any property across the medium. Whether or not it's easy to do, whether or not, like, it's subjective, or you can be objectively funny with your comedy, and also just the fact that, like, we never really talked about it.
Yeah.
Right. We don't.
We talked around it.
Yeah. We don't need to recommend series, because the series that we talk about in this episode, you will have already watched or know about it.
Yeah.
So it's just mute at this. It's just moot at this point to even, like, recommend series, unless we are compelled to say, hey, look, of all comedy series, this is the one to get into. But I think, like, a lot of entry points for people getting into into anime, if it wasn't like fantasy and action, it'd be comedy.
Yeah. So I think let's start off this comedy genre breakdown by posing a question, Will. And I would so much as to say, in my personal opinion, comedy as an anime and manga genre kinda is tough nut to crack. But if it's a subgenre, so it's like an isekai comedy, it is a slice of life comedy, action comedy, fantasy comedy, basically where the comedy is prominent but secondary. I feel like comedy, that's where it shines. Now, whether or not it's always going to be that way is really tough to say. But I think that would sort of be like the question I pose first that I think we can discuss.
So you're saying in this sense that comedy really shines more as a subgenre as opposed to a standalone genre.
Yeah, because I mean, if we earlier you talked about Mal, right? Mal, in terms of genres, comedy is by far the most, if I remember.
Absolutely. Like it just doesn't compare
Yeah,
at all.
like we're talking magnitudes.
Like if we talk about like how many series of anime are tagged with comedy, comedy has 7,639 tags. The next closest one is fantasy at 5,859. Action comes in third with 5,470, but I think a lot of fantasy also intertwines with action.
Yep.
And adventure. Adventure is the fourth most tagged. So yeah, whether or not comedy itself is standalone or as a subgenre, it just exists in a plethora of properties.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether or not it is the main genre, that's to be decided, because you know how these things go with genre tags. Like, as long as it shows or exhibits like a little bit of something, then you would say, okay, fine, we can tag it as comedy. Like, for example, like if you look at the comedy anime tab on my anime list, the 10th highest scored series is Owari Monogatari, second season.
Yep.
Which I wouldn't say any of the Monogatari series are like comedy focused. It has a lot of comedy bits,
elements,
right?
It's comedic.
Then
at
you also
times.
have things like Dangers of My Heart season 2. You have Bocchi the Rock. You have Mob Psycho 100 the second season. You have Kaguya-sama Love is War, which that one's a little bit like of an in between. I think the romance and the comedy is definitely well balanced in that one. But you have some other things in here too, like Tatami Galaxy, Bakuman season 3, Delicious in Dungeon, Samurai Champloo, A Place Further Than the Universe. All those series that I mentioned just now, you wouldn't think that comedy is the primary driver.
Yeah.
Right? Because Tatami Galaxy itself, look, I can wax lyrical about this series all I want. But yeah, like comedy is like one small part of it. It's got mystery, romance, it's got supernatural, psychological, time travel elements to it. It's an adult cast kind of thing. Bakuman is definitely not comedic at all. It's very much more on the drama side. Samurai Champloo, whoever said it's comedy, like, hey, stop kidding yourself.
Yeah.
It's absolutely not that at all.
I think when we talk about comedy, people think of the Nichijos.
People will think of like the Psyche K's, the Azumanga Daios, the Asobi Asabases, Prison School.
Yes.
Right? And I think those on its own, those that stand alone as having comedy as the sole genre.
Or as the main genre, right?
Yeah. As like the overriding one compared to all the other subgenre tags they might have. Yeah, like those are probably like the gold standard.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Daily Lives of High School Boys.
Yes.
Right? That's you can't say anything else other than
comedy
this is
first.
Pure comedy.
Yeah. And I think the issue then becomes, well, how is it that the comedy genre has the most amount of entries, yet it is obviously, when it comes down to primary comedic series, there is not a lot of it. Obviously,
there is a lot of it. There's Gintama season 2,
exactly.
Season 3, season 4, Gintama the very final,
the movie,
Gintama the movie.
Yeah. So does that
Gintama
mean
the second movie?
Yeah, exactly. So does that mean then, therefore, by just cursory kind of speculation, that it really only works more as a subgenre than it really is as the main character of the genre tags?
Yeah, like okay.
And is that a problem?
When speaking about, for example, Gintama, right? Gintama is not just comedy.
It isn't.
They have I mean, of course, it's like a lot of gag humor, a lot of dark humor, a lot of parody, but it's also historical. It's action heavy. It's also got some sci-fi elements in there too. There's some dramatic moments in there too. Some slight romance. It's hard to find something that is purely one genre unless it's a very specific one.
Yeah.
Right? Like suspense, like horror, like romance. But even with romance, you will find comedic elements. You'll find dramatic elements in there too. Right?
I just think that when it comes down to these hybrids, which obviously there is never hardly ever going to be one that is just one tag and that's it, right?
No, absolutely not.
Because you can always bullshit around.
Well, I mean, you could say that something is just action, pure action, right? Because there are a lot of those, but it's like that's the easiest one to do in terms of like you just hype up a lot of animation, a lot of fight choreography, shoot some people in the head, you good, right? But when we're trying to figure out like whether comedy can stand alone as a primary genre or whether or not it needs to be attached to another genre type, then you basically pose a pretty good question. Can you just have pure comedy and let it
rock,
let
right?
it do its thing, right?
Yeah.
And the simple answer is yes, because we have seen that before. We have seen that with Daily Lives of High School Boys. We've seen that with Psyche K, Asobi Asobase.
The gold
Nichijou,
standard ones that we
right?
talked about, right? Yeah.
Prison School, Lucky Star, right?
Yeah,
Those-
Lucky Star counts for sure.
Yeah. It's just that the comedy element is a little bit different. Some of them are a bit more slapstick, some are more gags.
Was
some
it
of them are
Dear
more dark.
Friend, Nokotan?
Oh yeah, Nokotan, yeah.
And then Sakamoto.
Oh yeah,
I'm cool. Sakamoto. I forgot the name.
the glasses guy,
Yeah, glasses guy. But
not Sakamoto Days.
No.
Sakamoto Days is also glasses guy. Damn.
and it's also comedic to a certain extent too.
Oh, have you heard I'm Sakamoto?
Oh yeah, have you heard I'm Sakamoto?
Sakamoto desu ka.
Yes.
That's it, yeah.
So there are by definition literally anime manga series that have comedy as like their main focus, their specialization, if you will. But that's, in my opinion, very few and far between. Like, if you want me to list off the amount of isekais shows, we'll be here for days.
Or that have the comedy element in there, or just isekai. Yeah, I mean, you've got Slime, you've got Konosuba,
Mm-hmm.
you've got. I mean, there's obviously some in Overlord as well.
Yep, 300 Slime.
Yeah.
And then if I go to Slice of Life, I can definitely tell you a lot of Slice of Life comedies. We even use that phrase, Slice of Life comedies, all the damn time. Azumanga Daioh is probably one of the best.
Sci-fi comedy. You got Dr. Stone. You got Steins Gate.
What about Space Dandy? Would that count?
Oh, absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Right? Then if I go to action comedy, okay, then it's obvious at that point.
Just shonen.
Right.
That's just what shonen is.
And then when you go, okay, then Jason, what about horror comedy?
Oh, shit, whatever that one was called. I forgot. You remember?
Miracle-chan.
Yeah, Miracle-chan, yes. But I think, like, when we try to sort of dissect everything and make it so it's like, oh, if everything stood alone on its own, right? Like, oh, you can only do action. You can only do horror. You can only do mystery, suspense, comedy, whatsoever, or whatever, right? I think that if you were to have series, and we have series that are specifically just that one specific genre, yeah, they can definitely shine. To be able to shine, though, action in itself is pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Right? You get good fight choreography, you get some good like power leveling.
You get frames per second.
Yeah, you gotta have some smooth animation, right? Romance, hey, you just gotta fall in love with the characters and watch the characters fall in love with each other, right? Drama, you gotta either make people cry or make people angry. You gotta do something to really rile up the emotions.
Yep.
Supernatural, hey, just do some spooky shit.
Do some spooky shit.
Right?
Quote of 2025 right there.
And then horror, just don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Just do nothing. That's horrific enough. I just think that comedy is, I would even so far as to say in general, in terms of all forms of media, is almost hardly works on its own in comparison to its subgenre.
If you were to remove the gold standards, right, like your Shimoneta's, Prison School, Gintama, Disastrous Life of Seki K, and all that, like if you remove all those, yes, But there's a reason why those stand out. It is because it's comedy done well, comedy done right. It's not to say that, for example, like if you do a fantasy show, it's always going to do well, right? You still
Right.
need to make sure that you have the elements of fantasy in there to hook your readers and your watchers in. Same with action, same with adventure, same with horror, even though horror is like pretty much non-existent. So I think the question you pose is whether or not comedy itself is the hardest genre to do.
Sure.
Whether
I mean, that leads into that. Yeah.
Whether it's like if you were to do it as a standalone, is it as likely you could be successful doing a only comedy genre versus an only action or an only mystery, suspense, whatever. And I think it's there's different answers to this, and the fact that like you just say, yes, it is absolutely the hardest because it's multifaceted. There's definitely different versions of comedy. You can go for completely absurdist. You can do like just toilet humor. You can do gag stuff. You can do etchies. You can do more slice of life chill, like little quips and bickerings and whatnot. But on the other side as well, you can also say it is one of the easiest, and the reason why is because there's so many. Right? If it was so hard, then why do we have we have close to 8,000 tags on my anime list, and that's only just stuff that they have on their database. There's definitely way more manga and anime than there is whatever's on Mal, right? So depending on how you see it, like I could validate both answers. One, it is the hardest because it's the hardest to perfect, but on the other hand, it's the easiest to do because everybody's doing it.
Yeah, and I think the issue there comes: why is it that this is such a hard nut to crack? Again, as a subgenre, let's just put that argument to bed that, hey, whether it is kind of funny, a little bit funny, or has comedic elements or not, all right, like you can kind of, slot the comedy subgenre tag in pretty much anything almost.
It is. It's literally the
laziest implementation.
I wouldn't say lazy. I think it's just the most like easily adaptable element of any series, right? You can have a little joke in a horror series. You can have like a little quip in action. You can have some sort of weird inside baseball knowledge thing when talking about historical comedy and whatnot, right? But it's not likely where it's like comedy is the overriding thing, and then all of a sudden there's a little shock, a little horror,
yeah,
right? Or like, I mean, you could see, for example, like Nichijou would have like random action sequences in there too.
Yeah, they're actually really well animated too.
Right? But again, you wouldn't say it's an action series. It's purely comedy, right? And it's just the fact that like it acts as a really good supplement to what the main genre is. Without the comedy, Kaguya-sama would not be what it is.
But I wouldn't say it will dramatically. Actually,
no, right? Like I mean, the ride of watching and reading Kaguya-sama is seeing like the comedic battles between the two main characters.
I mean, Konosuba is also the same in that, like,
same thing.
If you remove the comedy element, it is super generic.
If you
isekai.
didn't have Aqua as a meme, Konosuba would be nothing.
Well, a lot of nothing.
Well, you would also not have Explosion.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah.
That's the thing, right? Like, you remove that from those series, and all of a sudden, you're just watching something that is relatively generic. The comedy itself is what sets each different series apart. There are so many fantasy comedies, romance comedies, but why do people gravitate to one versus the other? It's because those jokes work well, or this setting works best to have a more chill comedic background in lieu with the romantic override or the dramatic override or whatever it may be.
Can you imagine One Punch Man without the comedy?
It would just be a sad, broken fest of watching a guy just beat the shit out of people for no fucking reason. He would not even go out and get discount groceries. He would not get his leeks and spring onions. Right? He would just go around and just punch a bug because the bug stepped on a shoe. Like that's basically it. Like it does sound like we're making it seem like it's a derogatory thing where like, oh, comedy just is like the glue, right? It just is there to make other things excel.
Well, let me then get into that, because that is also another discussion topic, which is in a very how do I say it? In summary, the point that I'm trying to allude to is laughter worth less than other emotional responses?
Oh, that's a bit too black and white there. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that like that's its only sole purpose, and that like if you need a laugh, just throw a joke in there, and then they just let it fester. It would be a bit. It would just constitute just being lazy at that point. If all you do with the comedy is just throw in a joke and then just leave it at that.
So isn't it then by definition then lesser?
No, but then like at the same time, you're saying that like you put in the minimum effort, which clearly a lot of these series don't do that.
Right.
Right? Like the level of comedy you see in Kaguya-sama, in Gintama.
Yes.
Right? Like without those jokes, you wouldn't be able to elevate or even be as like Gintoki, the main character, would not be as fun a person to watch if it was not one of the funniest anime characters to exist.
Yeah.
Right? So it would not be, it's a bit harsh and lazy to say that like we're just using comedy and for this one purpose and then that's it. It serves no other purpose and that's it, right? Like
no, I'm not saying it serves no purpose. I'm just saying it's worth less.
No, because a lot of characters are built on the description of being comedic characters. Without it, they're not the same character anymore.
Right, but let me play
Right? Like
let me play devil's advocate. When I say to you, what are like the top best animes that anyone should watch, right? When in your opinion, will you come down to a choice that is primarily comedic in nature?
No, but that's a different question. That's nothing to do with whether or not it's lesser than the other. What you're saying here is that like the comedic parts only amount to a small portion of a greater thing, and then now you're saying that if it was just the one thing only, how does it compare to everything else? I think those are two entirely different questions.
Sure, we can have both of those discussions.
Because at this point, right, like we've already mentioned like the gold standards of comedic anime.
Yes.
Right? And I love Gintama, and of course, like I don't need to recommend people to watch it because people probably already have. Right? Same with Kaguya-sama.
Right.
Right? So like it's not like fair to say that like, oh, because there's obviously series that are really masterful with their action and really, really good with their supernatural, that like it supersedes a really, really well done comedic one. Like there's obviously like there are obviously people that would love and watch things that are solely comedy. I mean this is not just within anime too. Like there's a lot of comedic series that come out in other mediums and other formats too. It's one of the easiest to do because of the fact that you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time. And that's the thing, too, with time, right? Like, when you're needing to animate frames, when you need to create character designs and whatnot, it's simple. It could just be the every man, every woman, put in a situation, throw some jokes in. If they hit, they hit. If they don't, they don't. Right?
No biggie.
Yeah, but you could say the same with any other genre, right? And so I wouldn't say that, like, there's a hierarchy in terms of what a genre's significance is. It's more just the fact that it comes down to how the creator chooses to apply it, right? You could have there's a lot of really bad action. There's a lot of really bad romance, just as much as there are good romances. And I think like the sort of ratio is fairly similar, right? Yes, you will have. It is true, and it's evidential that there is a massive amount of comedy versus other genres, but there is just as many bad comedy series as there are good series. It's just the fact that if you divide, let's say it's like half of them are good, half of them are bad. That's like 4,000 bad ones, 4,000 good ones versus 2,000 bad action ones and 2,000 good action ones. It's going to be more evident to you that there are more bad series. Therefore, you might have a bit more of a negative perspective on how comedy is perceived within the usage of within its usage in anime.
And isn't that kind of shows the fact that we as maybe a fan base treat comedy in a way that shouldn't be that way, basically?
No, I mean,
we kind of give I personally feel like in general, and I'm a culprit, I'm like, I do this all the time, is I don't really find a lot of things funny even though they're supposed to be.
But that's, again, a subjective thing,
Right.
right? So, but then, like, that's not representative of what the genre is, though.
Isn't it?
No. I mean, like, if you were to say that, like, I mean, like, do you have the same level of subjectivity towards comedy as opposed to romance? No. There's a reason why you have a lot more, like, romance stuff that is on the top of your list versus what's on comedy. It's because of the fact that not all comedy is going to fit your shoe, right? You're not going to have one, like look, I love Gintama. I don't know how you feel about it.
I haven't watched it before.
Right? But there's a reason why it's super popular. But you can also find just as many people who don't really care about Gintama, despite the fact that Gintama is super popular, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that comedy is bad, though.
No.
It just means that comedy isn't always going to work across the board. Same with action. Same with romance. Same with horror. I mean, horror is a different thing. Let's just say that all horror anime is just trash.
Okay, well, okay, yeah, sure.
I mean, name a good one. We've done this before.
Sure. I mean, we're talking about comedy, not horror in this case. So yeah.
But the point still stands in that, like, it is not necessarily the most fair to say that, like, just because a comedy doesn't work for you means it's bad. Right? Like, that's the whole point in subjectivity, right? Like, you do have a voice, and your voice matters, but that doesn't mean that other voices are of lesser, like, importance. There's going to be, like, many people who feel that certain comedic series work well for them, and then there's going to be a small percentage who don't feel the same way.
I just think that comedy is a genre that is almost impossible to be universally liked, and therefore it encounters an issue that I feel other genres don't really need to face. For example, when I think of action, other than the fact that you don't like action, you don't like blood and gore, right? Let's just exclude those audiences, for example. I would say the barometer for action is pretty simple, as you said, right? Frames per second, choreography, color vibrancy, that's just the way it is, and that is always going to be the way it is for the most part, right?
Yep.
For romance, the premise, the characters, the even you could say the love triangle, the drama, that is what makes almost all romances good or bad, is using those factors to judge it. And I would say for a lot of people, we can all probably collectively agree that the best of action or the best of slice of life or the best of romances are pretty much universal across the board. Now, which one you would say supersedes each other? Sure, you can have that, debate and splitting hairs discussion any day of the week. But I would feel that to a certain extent, there is no question that there are a good amount of shows that when I think of action and I just name a bunch of, like, JJK, I don't think anyone is going to say that that is a bad action show. That you can say that you don't like it. You could say you don't like Spirit and Demons. You could say that
again, subjectivity, though. There are going to be people that would be like, no, JJK is not good. There are going to be people that say that Demon Slayer does not look good. There are people that exist. It's probably like 0.01%, but there are people who would say that. And where I'm getting at here is that action in itself, romance in itself, there's not a lot of derivative forms of it.
Yeah.
Whereas comedy does.
And don't you think that means it's so hard to pin down, and that's why it never works as a genre then?
Well, that's not fair to say, because then you're saying that, like, because it doesn't work as one sole thing, then it's never going to work. But, like, comedy itself, you already mentioned, right? It's broken down into so many different types of humor that you're always going to find different pockets of people who enjoy it. There's always going to be people that like gag humor, people who like dark humor, people who like absurdist stuff, right? If you wanted to find a one-size-fits-all solution, that's not what comedy is. But that's what action is. That's what fantasy is.
So
That's
then
what romance-
comedy as a genre is just different than all the other genres then.
it is different.
Isn't that what I'm just saying
No,
as
but
well?
but
We're
you're-
holding it at a different
No,
regard.
no, you're saying it's a lesser form.
Well, yeah, but I also say
Because
that it's different, and I then therefore pose the question, is it lesser? I'm not saying it is lesser. I'm saying
It's not. It's absolutely not lesser. It's different. You have to look at it from a different lens.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what comedy is. Again, it's down to subjectivity and it's down to your own perspective of what makes what's funny to you. It's the same way that we can say with horror. What is scary for you? What is tense for you?
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, it's like that's why when we're talking about horror in anime, a lot of it doesn't hit because it just doesn't have that same level of tension, of suspense that we expect from horror, or even like psychological elements. A lot of times when people like watching horror, it's more for like the gore and disgusting elements, which for me is like not representative of what horror is.
For me, I watch horror. I like the thrill of what horrific situation is on screen or whatever while I'm sitting comfy in my chair, but my heart is palpitating like crazy.
Yes. Which is like...
And I'm sweating.
It's one of those travesties for me where it's like Japanese horror, at least from like a movie form, and also like to an extent some mangas as well, is like the creme de la creme. It's like, mwah, you can't go beyond all the Junji Itos and the blood on the tracks.
Yeah, and those are already two crazily different horror genres within itself.
Yes. But when it comes to doing it in anime form, I think it's just the fact that it's that sort of like suspension of disbelief and whatnot, where it's like it comes off as a situation where like it's you don't have that uncanny valley. You separate yourself from knowing that this is just purely fictional because it's all cartoonish, even though like you have anime, but you have manga. But at least with manga, there is a level of your own creativity where like you get to create your own sort of soundtrack in your head, how the characters sound, how slowly you move from one page to another. Horror games, you are literally playing that character, and whatever you interact will either scare the fuck out of you or make you piss your pants or whatnot. Movies, hey, we're all human, right? And therefore there is that sense of relation there. And that's why I think like anime itself, I actually did want to talk about it as like a BP at some point, but we'll see about that. Where like horror is just not something that works well with anime. Comedy, on the inverse, is something that works really well with anime because of the fact that it is very much a sandbox genre, in that you can mold it however you want, and you will find somebody or a plethora of people that will enjoy it. Whether or not the comedy slaps for you specifically is not necessarily representative of how well an anime is going to do.
In
right?
terms of a comedy anime.
Yeah. And so, like, I disagree in the sense that it is a lesser form, because at that point, like, you can start dissecting all genres and do the same thing. Right?
Sure.
You can do the same thing with, like, your fantasies, your reincarnations, your isekais and whatnot, your video game fantasies and whatnot. So like once you get to a really, really granular level, you're no longer talking about comedy. You're talking about like a sub element within an element of comedy.
I just feel that on a personal level, if you were to like survey a lot of anime or maybe not manga, because the good anime palette, right? If you were to survey a lot of people that watch anime with varying level degrees of dedication to the medium, it would probably be really difficult to find a lot of shows that I feel your opinion of why that show is great is because the comedy slaps.
Well, that's not necessarily down to the comedy or like the series itself, but it's also just down to the business, right?
The business of
the anime business.
Okay.
Right? Especially with action, you can sell merch, you can sell video games, you can sell merchandise, you can sell like a lot of stuff out of it. And it's also like it's very clear that like with advertising, it gravitates more towards like the action genre than anything else.
So doesn't that mean then?
Well, then that means you don't see as much romance. You don't see as much sci-fi. Does that mean that those genres are derivative compared to action? No, I don't think that's...
Well, I think action takes a back... I think a lot of people, myself included, when I think of anime,
when people think of anime, they think of shonen action because it's the biggest thing.
Exactly.
But that's not like done so that like, oh, all other genres are
irrelevant. No.
It's just the fact that it just so happens that
to be the poster child.
It also just so happens that the biggest anime company in the world, the biggest manga company in the world, happens to be
Shonen action.
Shonen action,
Right.
right? That's just, I mean, like, you could say the same thing with, like, IRL movies, like real life movies, right? Like action flicks. Like, how many Mission Impossibles and how many fucking Fast and Furiouses do we need, right? But there's already like a 10th Fast and Furious. There's like, I mean, Tom Cruise is like 60 something and he's still doing his own stunts and whatnot.
Right.
It's because that shit sells. Comedy wise, yes, they end up being really, really popular, either through cult or through like just general popular opinion. But it's momentary. It's not necessarily going to be like, oh, we need to keep on making more and more comedy, because eventually comedy has to evolve. Like jokes that existed in the 70s and 80s do not hit the same way they do now, and whatever we say now is not representative of the past, nor does it dictate how we're going to be viewing comedy in the future. It's a very fluid process. Like, that's like, comedy is essentially literature. It's writing, and you're only as good as how good you are with your pen or your stylus or your keyboard. Whereas action, it gets like we're still like watching stuff from the gladiatorial days. The Gladiator 2 came out last year, and like, people are still pining on stuff like 300. What's the plot of 300? I don't fucking know. It just means, oh, this is Sparta, kick a guy down the hole, done. Right? Like, it's
the 300 Roman people against the Persian Empire, but yes.
Okay, you're stop ruining my point, dude.
No. No. Okay, no. But I understand what you're trying to say. But I also feel like because of that, that's why comedy is so hard. That's why it is everywhere and nowhere all at once. I am not trying to do a pun. I literally mean that. I also mean the fact that I personally think that comedy is like within that ballpark of when we talk about if the joke slaps or not for one person or another, that obviously implies a level of subjectivity, right?
And context as well.
Right? Yeah, absolutely, right? But I feel that when people say is comedy subjective, I think there is a huge difference when someone dismisses it and says, oh, I don't get it, but I guess comedy is subjective, versus us having a very in-depth scholarly discussion. Is comedy subjective?
This is hardly scholarly, but you know.
No, but I'm trying to toot our own horn here. But the point I'm trying to make is in both situations, the reason of comedy is subjective is used. But in my opinion, one is very dismissive and like obviously a bad way to assess things, and then the other one is trying its best to figure something out that may or may not have any answers, but at least we can have a discussion about it. And I feel that in a way you can't really tell when someone says, oh yeah, I think comedy is subjective, because when someone says that, you don't know if that's all the thought that they put behind it.
I mean, at
or
the same time,
it has like years and years of context.
At the same time, you're also wondering if they're just using comedy as a blanket term and just
exactly,
covering everything that's funny versus actually, you know what? Like, I do like I do like some gag stuff. I do like dark humor. I do like a good bit of ecchi comedy and whatnot.
Yeah, I think comedy is unique and different in that other genres just either don't have that burden, or is either more clearly defined, or universally accepted, or has universally accepted kind of criteria.
Well, it's mostly because
comedy has it tough. I'm being dead ass. I think comedy has it tough.
No, but I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is like a lesser form, though.
Well, you could argue the fact that it doesn't have an identity means
that's
no,
that's so black and white, man.
I know. Again, you know how I feel about this as more of like just a spur discussion.
I get that, but at the same time, it's also like we need to be careful with how we're painting this in the sense that, like, if we're just like saying like comedy is this or comedy is that, and then that's it. There's no in between. Whereas as we've explained with the multitude of subgenres within comedy, that is more than just this or that.
Right.
So again, like you
but I could also see from another perspective, someone being like, well, if everything is a comedy, then it almost doesn't matter. The tag of it doesn't matter. Because you can kind of attach it to pretty much fucking anything. And here's the problem. I can't really dispute that definitively when someone says that. And that really bothers me because I think Nichijou, for example, is probably one of the cream of the crop comedy shows, but I think some of their gags really suck. I think some of the other gags within, or the comedic bits within Nichijou, is one of the best comedic things I've ever seen and that I will ever see. But it is within Nichijou that has such a divisive opinion in me that, like, oh yeah, these slap so hard, but these ones don't land, and they're so different from each other.
Yeah, but again, like, we're still taking a very subjective perspective on this, right?
I mean, everything when we assess art has to be subjective to a certain point. It can't be purely objective.
I mean, everything. I mean, like, the simple answer would be, everything is subjective, right? Like, some action slaps, some don't. Action slaps, sometimes it doesn't, right? But again, it's like, just because a joke itself doesn't hit for you doesn't mean it's not going to hit for somebody else, and therefore, like, one bad thing that represents a specific detriment of a series should not be representative of everything, that you're trying to vouch for.
But then wouldn't you say in that example that you just posed that if this joke doesn't land for you but it lands for me, it is not any lesser of a comedy anime, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't work for you.
That's a shame for me then.
But I would argue with other genres, it is not as cut and dry as, these gags don't work for me, or these jokes don't work for me.
Not that long ago, we talked about Sakamoto Days,
Mm-hmm.
and you heard I said it's a good action series, but I didn't like the action. It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
The fights don't slap. A lot of fights in action anime actually don't look good at all. But I still like the series in spite of it.
And I think a lot of people probably share the same opinion, but
that in itself would then also apply to comedy.
I think it's just way more cut and dry because either it hits or it doesn't. And in the sense that either you get the joke or you don't. And because if you don't get a joke,
isn't that the same as, like, whether you like the action or not, though? How is it different?
Because I would feel that when it comes to action, there's at least a lot of facets that I can kind of say.
Well, I mean, it's the same with comedy, too.
Such as?
Well, the fact that, like, a certain joke works for other people because they might have the context behind it.
Right.
They might be of a certain diaspora, a certain culture. And therefore, it's like, I mean, it's the same with, like...
And that's difficult to pull off in terms of a law of large numbers. Whereas I feel like with with action, with romance, it is easier to get everyone to a consensus. Whereas with comedy, because
I mean, like, it's easier because of the fact that it's just more popular for action. I mean, romance in itself is a separate thing, but
sure,
like, action itself, it's just the fact that it is the most popular one.
Sure,
it is the one that, like, people put the big bucks in, and it's also
that's where it puts the big bucks in, and that's where it gets
it's also
the most...
because it doesn't cost a lot to make comedy. Like, you're not needing to use crazy engines and editors to be able to. You don't need a Sakuga moment. Yes, Nichijou did it, but that's like an anomaly.
Sure,
right? Therefore, like, it's not as much time spent animating the series. It's much easier just to have, simple backdrops, simple characters, deliver your lines, and it works. Look, Psyche K, I'll admit, it looks garbage compared to a lot of my anime, but the jokes for me worked really well. The jokes for a lot of people that I speak to work really well. Some people didn't like it. That's fine. You could say the same thing with a lot of genres, man.
I just don't feel that I could watch a primarily comedic show and then be like, oh, I get the joke, but I don't find it funny.
Again, that's what you think, though, right?
Yeah, and that is what I'm saying. That is what I think. I can only speak for myself, right?
Yeah, but it's not definitive at this point, right? Like, I feel like you're putting a lot of, like, your own personal experiences into this. And
isn't it with the context of jokes with that? Because if I don't get the joke because I don't have the context, or the subjective element.
At this point, what I'm getting here is that comedy isn't for you.
Well, no, because I like Nichijou, I like Azumanga Daioh.
Yeah, but then at the same time, it seems like again, like you do then say that like comedy works well with those, but then you're also kind of disregarding all the other ones because you don't understand it or you don't find it funny.
Because
But
it's
that's
so watered down. Because everything you can really attach the comedic tag to it.
same with action, same with fantasy. There's so many terrible isekais out there. We keep complaining about why there's so many isekais of the same generic plot lines, of the same generic designs. It's the same thing. In the end, it's like we're more talking about it in the sense that like the anime industry pumps all this stuff out to see what sticks, and some are easier to do, some are harder to do, and therefore that's why we see a plethora of comedy because it's really easy to produce versus an action where if you have Sakuga moments where you have crazy choreography, it takes a lot more time than two characters bickering at each other. That's just it, right? It is really that simple, and that one is going to be easier to animate than the other, and therefore there's going to be a lot less need to pump as much money into something.
I would argue that, yeah, you're right. But that also makes action relatively easier to figure out because if you pump a lot of money in, if you sort of really figure out what colors look good to the palette, to the eye, you can pretty easily construct an action scene that is going to get the majority of people agreeing with you that that action slaps. But
yeah, but then you're also just pointing out the cream of the crop at that point.
Sure.
Right? So that's,
but I'm just saying
that's the same thing with like saying that Nichijou and Asobi Asobase and Prison School do well. Those are the cream of the crop. We're comparing apples to apples when we're talking about the best of the best.
Sure, but I'm just saying that when it comes down to it, comedy cannot be really enhanced by more money pumped into it. In fact, sometimes I would argue
you could by hiring better writers. I mean, I mean, like that's kind of like why like there's so many series that come out. It's because of the fact that the writers who want to flex. I mean, like Bill Hader is a great actor,
sure,
but he spends much more of his time writing jokes and writing bits for different shows than anything else. Like he had a huge part in writing a lot of jokes for South Park. You wouldn't have known that because of the fact that like you see him more as an on-screen personality, but sometimes it's like you want to be able to tell stories, you want to be able to tell jokes, and you want to be able to create a context in which your general audience can understand. It's hard to do because the context is not applicable to every single person. Action, yes, it's probably a little bit easier because of the fact that you could see when two people are fighting or when people are doing an action sequence. It's quite straightforward to see what's happening.
Yeah, you're kind of echoing exactly what I'm saying.
But at the same time, it's like, it doesn't mean it's going to do well. We've talked a lot about really bad action series whenever a new season comes out.
Sure, but the good ones though are generally pretty successful.
So are the good comedy ones. I mean,
I would argue not
Gintama
really.
ran for like almost 20 years. One Piece would not be the same without its comedy.
Sure.
I would even say Dan to Dan would not be the same without its comedy.
But I would not also say that it is primarily comedy.
I would say if you take out the comedy from Dan to Dan, it would not be what it is now.
Sure. But I would argue that...
And it would absolutely not be as popular.
Yeah. Just like how One Punch Man is the same thing.
Yeah, so that then again also proves my point in that like there is a pivotal moment in using comedy, and therefore like you have to have comedy not on the same. It's not saying that like everything needs to be compared to each other. It's just the fact that everything has its own different purpose, its own different usage, and some are more contextual than others. Some of them are more straightforward than others.
Then would you say that if something is more contextual and subjective than others, therefore it's harder?
Yes, it is. I mean, I wasn't disputing that it's harder. I'm disputing the fact that it's lesser.
Oh, okay.
That's basically it. It is hard to do comedy. It's easy to do action, and it's because of the fact that it's not. It doesn't take a whole. I mean, like again, I have to explain. I have to say.
Okay, then let me ask you this: then is laughter then worth more because when it hits, it's so rare?
Yeah, laughter is worth more.
So, in your opinion, then therefore,
Well, again,
laughter.
But again, though, it's like you need to think about like what the purpose of using the comedy is.
Sure.
Right, and I don't necessarily need to be like there doesn't have to be like an equivalent exchange of like a Sakuga moment is equal to a good laugh. Like at that point, because at that point, then like it just makes this whole discussion
moot.
There's no point in saying that like we're gonna like look. If you were to compare Demon Slayer to Kaguya-sama, is that a fair comparison? Absolutely not, because there's nothing in common with the other. Right? If you compare Chainsaw Man to Demon Slayer, yes. Because they're both of the same ilk. But if you were to compare a romance comedy with an action adventure, like purely of those genres, how would you compare it? One fight is better than a laugh?
Or like, I mean, you can go by a lot of measurements, right? Like how much money, how much merchandise, how much it is in the public zeitgeist.
Right. But if we're talking about like from a pure enjoyment level, right? Like,
who gives a fuck if other people don't enjoy the thing that I enjoy, as long as I get to enjoy it, right?
That's not what I mean. What I mean is that like you can't compare the amount of laughter you get from a comedy show versus how many like wow moments you get from an action sequence. It's not an equivalent exchange.
Yeah,
there is no equivalence.
None of them are.
So therefore, when you're saying that like laughter is worth more or comedy itself is a lesser form, like.
I did not say it's a lesser form, bro. I'm just saying it is.
You did say in the beginning that
it's worth less.
Isn't that any different? Where's the difference in that, though?
Because society or anime in general don't put a lot of, in my opinion, effort behind comedy as a whole.
There is obviously numbers to back that in the sense that there are more comedy series and that because of that, you see more fail. But in the end, it's still almost like a 1-to-1, right? You get 4,000 good, 4,000 bad, 2,000 good action, 2,000 bad. It's still 1-to-1. Again, it's just the fact that
there is equivalent exchange.
Equivalent exchange in that fact that I'm not saying that like a laugh and action is the same. I'm saying that like there is.
But you just did.
No, I'm saying comparing. No. Listen to what I'm saying, Jason. I'm saying that there is 4,000 good, 4,000 bad, 2,000 good, 1,000 bad. There is one bad movie, one bad action versus one good action, just the same as there's one bad comedy to one good comedy. I'm not saying that like.
But what makes a bad comedy and a good comedy?
Whether or not it makes you laugh. Action is the same. Whether or not you get into the fights, where you get into the action, it's the same. I don't know. I don't know where you're getting at with this. I don't necessarily understand that the comparison that we're having between action and comedy here.
I don't know. You're the one who took that example out.
I'm taking it out because I'm saying that like you say there's more. It's bad because there's more examples of it, but in the end, it's down to a ratio of 1-to-1. There's always going to be good stuff and bad stuff, like with any other genre. It just so happens that because the sample size is being bigger with comedy, it's more prevalent that people think it's bad. But
yeah, isn't that in of itself a pretty tragic thing? When comedy is in my opinion, really important.
I don't know why it's such a tragedy, though. I don't see it as a tragedy. Comedy hits for different people, just like action hits for different people. It's just that it's easier to produce an action comedy, an action series. Therefore, you're going to see more of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it.
Wait,
as a tragedy.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
I mean, why is it tragic for you?
Because I just want to watch more comedies.
There are more comedies. There is absolutely more comedies.
Yeah,
you just have to find it.
As a variant, yeah, probably, but none of them are like. There's not a lot of Nichijos, but there is a lot of Demon Slayer likes that are like really good, really awesome.
And how many of them have you watched, or how many are you continuing to watch? If you hear hammering, it's probably someone upstairs. Nothing's happening in here. Okay, but again, though, it's like. You understand how this train works within action shonen action, which like once you're done with your Demon Slayers, you gotta have your Hell's Paradise. Once you're done with your Hell's Paradise, you gotta have your Danadans, and then once you're done with your Danadans, you gotta get the movies of Demon Slayer and whatnot, and you just keep on pushing and pushing and pushing it. But at the same time, like we keep talking about how like action series within the WSJ are slowly just like not hitting anymore, and it's just people have to recycle, and people have to keep on like trying to people have to keep on trying to make things work. Like if we think about like how many action series from Shonen Jump get canceled before they even see the light of day in an anime form, isn't that in itself a tragedy? Isn't it the fact that like people keep trying to make action work but it doesn't?
Sure.
So it's not like the situations are the same, but you can see at least the commonality in that. Like it's hard. Like, what we're saying here is it's hard to make something good. It's really hard to make something that lasts decades, or at least like has an impression amongst the people. And every genre in itself has a microscope on it. It just so happens that there is more comedy, and therefore, at least from your perspective, it's easier to deride it as it's a harder thing to make, and therefore it's tragic because you aren't able to find certain series that tickle that funny bone for you. And I get that.
Yeah.
I feel the same with you too. I haven't watched a good comedy in a while.
Yeah.
But it's like I don't really care for a lot of action series anymore, and it seems that Shonen Jump also feels the same way because they keep canceling stuff left and right.
Yeah. I just really like comedy, but in the plethora of anime and mangas that I've read, very few and far between do I genuinely like laugh out loud. And whereas if I were to watch Demon Slayer now versus maybe 5-10 years ago, or for example, I watched Garden of Sinners now versus when it first came out, to a certain extent, it is preserved that I can definitively say, oh, it still checks out now. Like it still looks just as good.
Yeah,
But then if I were to look at a joke, maybe like a really sexist, misogynistic joke made 80 years ago versus now, probably 80 years ago, maybe it was hilarious according to the people then.
Yeah,
but then now it doesn't.
But again, like it's very contextual. Like I've had to say, like comedy evolves over time. Action hasn't necessarily evolved at all. It keeps a relatively simple formula. Comedy requires like understanding like your audience, understanding the times, understanding like social events, cultural events, political events. There's always a way to make light of something and then try and find a comedic twist of it. Action is just action. And I don't mean to say this as a derogatory way. I'm saying that like, oh, it's, ooga booga, like smooth brain shit for action. But it's not that hard to have people like see action scene and go, oh, that was cool.
Yeah.
That was really awesome.
That's
right?
That's my point. But then it's for if I as I said, if I survey a lot of people and then show them Demon Slayer, they'll be like, that's good animation. Yeah, you'll get like the 0.05% that hate it or whatever for whatever reason. But I think that proportion wise, you are not gonna get a consensus as easily when it comes to comedy compared to any other genre.
Compared to any other genre?
Okay, and maybe that is like the biggest blanket statement ever, but I would say
because again, like so far, like we've been focusing on two specific genres, being action and being comedy. But then, like,
because they're the biggest two.
What about romance? What
Sure,
about supernatural. What
I mean, I did say romance,
right?
And then you said put it aside for a bit.
Now let's go into it.
Okay,
then, right?
let's go.
Because if we're comparing every genre across the board, and at that point, then like it just divulges into looking at every minute detail of what makes a successful genre, what makes an unsuccessful genre.
Isn't that kind of like a genre analysis?
That's what we're doing right now. So
exactly.
I'm asking you that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so, like, if you were to say, like, romance.
Yeah.
Right? Like, name 10 top 10 romance animes or series that, like, you would say, this is universally accepted. This is universally, like, the creme de la creme.
Kaguya-sama, Horimiya.
Yeah, Kaguya-sama again.
Golden Time, probably.
I wouldn't say Golden Time is good.
Well, you said romance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, can I just check the top romance?
You can use it. Sure.
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Because it's really hard to think on the spot sometimes.
But I think it's like, again, like, I feel that romance in itself is kind of in a similar boat to comedy, and the fact that you have to sort of understand how to create character dynamics, you have to understand how to develop relationships, you have to understand development, you have to need to figure out the right level of drama in there, the right amount of heartbreak and resolution and happiness and whatnot. It gets down.
But I feel that in that context, right? It is universal in the sense that what you just said. It doesn't matter what language, right? To a great extent, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, the situational stuff will be different for each culture, right?
Again, there's definitely context behind certain romances. Like, for example, like After the Rain is absolutely not okay in a lot of places because the age gap, especially with the girl being in her high school age, that shit doesn't fly. But like once you get over it, or once you are okay with it, or you come from a culture that's okay with it, sure.
Or maybe that is part of the point of that romance is to put people in that like uncomfortable situation to deal with it.
It's contextual.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying that like I'm not saying like for like, but I'm saying that like you have to go through the same kind of hurdles in terms of understanding what works or what you're willing to risk with comedy as you do with romance. Action doesn't necessarily have that risk unless you just do it bad. The risk is just you do it badly. You don't animate things really well. The Sakuga moments don't come off well. That's essentially it, right? I wouldn't say like, for example, like if I was to go through like my my personal top 10 stuff, there's not going to be a whole lot of action in there, and it's because I feel that action kind of comes across as that big Hollywood experience. It's almost like a Disney experience for me, in that like you enjoy it for the moment it is, but it's like, do I really care about the plot of Demon Slayer? Not necessarily, but I do love the fights. The fights are really, really good. And so therefore, like, are we focusing on specific elements of action and how it supersedes other things? Or if we were to look at it as a whole, can we say consistently that an action series is going to be good? Because look at it this way. The recent season of Demon Slayer did not slap. People did not enjoy it. Right? There are definitely people that like love the shit out of the first season, Entertainment District arc, the train and all that. But Swordsmith, Hashira training, it's hard to say whether or not like the action in itself is going to carry it all the way through when people just didn't necessarily like universally enjoy the last two seasons versus how they felt about the movie and the first two seasons. That's just what I'm saying. Like, if you were to really look into it, do you care for an action series because of the action alone or as a whole?
Obviously, the really good ones as a whole, almost every facet would be pretty outstanding, right?
Yeah.
But in general, yeah, the action scenes in an action-oriented show carries more weight for me.
Yeah.
But the choreography from the action, the Sakuga moments, the frames per second,
But then again, it's like, if you were to remove the action away from your JJKs, your Demon Slayers, your Hell's Paradises, your Danadens, Danadens different because I think the blend of action and comedy make it something different. I feel that at that point, like, we're looking at something that is very much a generic template. All you have to do is just fine-tune an action sequence to make it work. Right? I completely agree with you in that comedy is a lot harder to make, is easier to do in terms of like animation-wise, but to actually write a joke is...
It's very easy to make a generic joke that doesn't slap, right?
That's why you have a lot of really bad ones too.
Exactly.
But again, you can also I can say the same thing about having really bad action sequences too, and bad action series. It's not like you have to try and figure out like which one's achieved more or which one is easier to achieve success with, because both of them just kind of have different purposes. Right? I mean, the bottom line is that they're both meant to entertain. But your level of entertainment comes from a different appreciation of whatever medium you're looking at, right? Like the way that somebody watches comedy is not the same as somebody who watches action or horror or action or romance. So therefore, it's not fair, nor is it straightforward to just sort of blanket it all and say that a certain genre is doing really well because it produces those moments and people are really, really vibing with it, right? Like, comedy kind of just stays where it is because a joke that worked today is not going to work tomorrow. Action is different because you just basically have to make sure that your fight choreography works. You have the right action, right lighting, the right music to go along with it, and then you're golden. But again, there's also only a handful of action series I could say that are like that have achieved that. Right?
Sure. Yeah. I just think that in general, the creme de la creme of comedy, I think there is a chance pretty high that today it works, tomorrow it works, but day after it just doesn't.
But that's what I was saying too.
Yeah,
That's
that's
what I'm saying.
and that's why I'm saying that sucks because I that's tragic to me because I think those are good shows.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that like because 20 years down the road people don't appreciate it, it instantly becomes a bad show.
Is it?
Right? Why would it be bad?
Because it just doesn't resonate with the audience anymore.
Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
You have people constantly bickering. It's one of the most popular IPs of all time. You always have people infighting and saying, "Oh, the first 3 were the best. Oh no, the 1, 2, 3 were good. No, 4, 5, 6 were better." And then you have some weirdo that says
7, 8, 9.
right? But again, like you have to understand that like people watched certain things from a different time. Action's going to look different in the future because you have better CG, you have better 3D,
Absolutely.
you have better animation.
I mean, if we look at like Demon Slayer now, it's impossible for that to even exist. Like the technology, I mean, like 15 years ago.
Matrix as well. Matrix
at the time
looked fucking fantastic.
It's crazy good.
If you were to watch the fight sequences now, you'd be like, I can see the wires, I can see where certain things weren't as smooth and whatnot. But like, that's why, like, if you were to ask somebody, like, you ask a Gen Z person to watch certain series. I mean, they do that. They have that YouTube
like
channel,
BuzzFeed thing, right?
Yeah, and I really don't like it because they always pick like very specific shows. Like, people watching Seinfeld and want to get a reaction out of people,
manipulating
right?
it. Yeah.
Right? So again, like a lot of stuff is a product of its time, and I understand for you that like a lot of the stuff that you watched did come from the past and you enjoyed it at that time, and you probably would still enjoy it now, right? But
sorry about that drilling. I don't know why. All of a sudden there's like knocking and drilling.
But I think like as with any genre, something that works now and probably works in 5 years time is probably not going to work the same in 20 years time. Like if I was to, I mean, like people love One Piece, but the first couple episodes, the first couple seasons, if you were to call them seasons, because they just never stopped airing them, were tragically awful. Like the action sequences, the animation styles, the choreography and things looked terrible, which is why Wit Studio is, for some reason, still not coming out with it yet, but going to be remaking the One Piece with those specific things to make it look better.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have video games that constantly have remakes or revitalizations and whatnot. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I was talking to you off air about Dead Space, right? Dead Space 1 looked really cool at the time. If you look at it now, it looks really bad.
Except the remake, though.
Is fucking beautiful. Is
primo.
Gorgeous. I would say Callisto Protocol looks better, but gameplay-wise, not even in comparison. But that's the thing, right? Like, over time, perspectives change. Over time, things just aren't the same as they were in the past. So you constantly... And I think that's it. Like, with comedy, you got to figure out ways to sort of understand the current climate. You have to understand different social cultural cues. You have to understand different political situations. Or you could just be more simple and just think, what would be something that can get a cheap laugh, right? It's the same with action. What would be really cool to do something that is like a historical fiction or a sci-fi or something that's contemporary, and what kind of fight choreography or what kind of action sequences can we have that make it work in this day versus why don't we just make something that looks really cool in the 90s and redo it. Sometimes just things change. Comedy doesn't slap as much as it used to because you find different things funny now versus in the past. And if you can't find something that tickles that bone for you, then unfortunately you're not going to find it. Action, for the most part, it's more of a chameleon at that point. It's easier to change your shape and to change your tone because there's less things you need to change. Comedy, on the other hand, like, I completely agree. You have to do a lot of research. You have to do a lot of thinking. You have to do a lot of drafting,
and the audience has to also be in the right context or even in the right mood. Even if you have the right context, if you're not vibing, that's so weird to say. If you are just not in the mood for a comedy and I show you a comedy, you probably won't laugh, even if you get the jokes or you understand the context, right?
Yeah. No, so I completely agree with you that comedy is harder to do. In fact, I would say that, like, no, it's harder to do well. It is easy to do because you can just make a joke and then just ship out your product and then see who laughs, right?
And that sucks to me because in the same breath, both are considered in the same ballpark, and I just don't really like that.
I mean, that's just the state of the industry, though. Unfortunately, I don't think it's down to. It also just comes down to just consumer behavior. People want to see more action, despite the fact that, in my opinion, every action series is pretty much a derivative form of the previous one, because they all follow similar character stereotypes and character traits and tropes, and also following similar plot lines and end goals.
So by definition, comedy is seeked out less. Isn't it?
I don't really have an answer for that because I don't think that that's the right kind of statement to make. I can't really argue with it.
And that is the problem. Because I want you to say that is wrong because I want it to be wrong, but I don't think it is. Do you know what I mean? Why would we... I mean, we're listeners, we are kind of arguing because
here's the thing, though: is it the fault of the comedy genre itself, or is it the fault of the writers behind it?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I think that's a really good question, actually. Or is it inherent to comedy?
No, I don't think it's inherent. I think as long as you have people who know how to do it, they can do it right. It's just there's not as many people that can do it. Right. That's essentially it. I mean, like, there are so many comedians that I absolutely love. Right, I mean, like, to this day, like, I love, like, do you like Bill Burr?
I think he's pretty good.
Bill Burr, I absolutely love because he always tries to find ways to be that angry redhead, that bald. Well, he's not a redhead anymore; he's just bald as fuck. But and he'll take that because he's also an angry old man. But he finds ways to understand, like, what grinds his gears, but also apply it to current contexts. The stuff that he yelled about, when he was in Philadelphia 20 years ago, is not going to be the same as what he's yelling about now, right? He's not making jokes about Trump like he was 20 years ago versus now because there was no relevance to it. I think that what you have is just the fact that whilst you have a lot of writers and choreographers that work within action, where you can seek people who have worked on big projects and be able to create certain properties that have that wow factor, it's not easy to find a good comedic writer. And even if you do find one, it's not guaranteed that that person is going to write something that everybody's going to like. It's just that's just the state of it. It's not
and
so
that
much.
Sucks to me.
It sucks. I can't say
it's tragic.
I can't say, like, whether or not it's right or wrong that comedy is less sought after, because I still believe that there is always a space for comedy. There's a reason why it keeps on coming out, right? You wouldn't just pump something out without at least seeing the numbers behind it, right? Like, if a manga was doing well enough and you want to boost those sales, then you would make an anime out of it.
What you just said, I kind of disagree, because let's say if I were to get a generic isekai, right? Like, generic as fuck. And then I go, yeah, but then make the female main character go into the bathroom but forget to lock the door, and then the guy comes in trying to go to the bathroom. Hilarity ensues, right? And then you probably on the other side of the table being like, oh my god, this motherfucker. He thinks that just adding that will make it funny. But people do that all the time.
Yes, but again, that just comes down to the quality of the writers that they have. People are probably going to want to pay more for good action versus good comedy because
Do you
action sells.
do you
That
think
that's I think that's unfortunately, if we were to just look at like the top best-selling manga series, I mean, of course there's going to be some
Ooh,
that are like
that's-
slice of life,
or like Doraemon?
but
I
that's
mean,
good. But that's
yeah.
but again,
or Shin-chan?
again, like Crayon Shin-chan, like Crayon Shin-chan's comedy, right?
Yeah,
But the thing,
hella
but
comedy.
the thing with that is that they've lasted decades. Like Doraemon was before even you were born, right?
It's like comparing One Piece to like this pretty good action show of the season, right? It's just a mammoth versus a Goliath.
Yeah, but let's look here, right? One Piece. I'm just gonna go over things that I believe are a bit more on the action side and everything. Is Gogo 13 an action? Gogo 13 is a mystery.
What are you looking at actually?
List of best-selling manga of all time. So,
manga. Okay, so are we into manga now, or are we going back to anime?
I mean,
or like it's both.
Well,
They're
that's the
both.
metrics that you have,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
you can't do best sales of anime unless you look at DVDs, but that's like
You're not
that's
gonna-
that's
you're
not
not gonna do
representative of
that.
anything, right? So you got
You
One
could check
Piece.
movie tickets.
You got One Piece, you got Dragon Ball, you got Naruto, you got Demon Slayer, Attack on Titan, Bleach, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Kingdom, Baki the Grappler, Fist of the North Star, Hajime no Ippo, Jujutsu Kaisen, My Hero Academia, and then you have some stuff sprawled in there like Kindaichi Files. Fucking awesome. But you also have like Gogo 13, you have Crayon Shin-chan, Oishimbo.
Okay, so you named all those series, right?
Yeah. So there, when you see those kinds of numbers for action series, it just makes sense that the industry is going to want to put more effort and promote big action series. I think that comedy in itself is. It's hard to disagree with you that comedy is less sought after, because if it was, then you would see more comedy on here, right?
Right.
Which in any case, like I wouldn't say Doraemon. Doraemon's a children's manga,
Yeah.
right? The only one that I can really see here is Crayon Shin-chan.
Yeah, that one I would say is pretty definitively heavily comedic based for sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I wouldn't say it's a shame because of the fact that I understand that you want to see more comedy, but I guess that's just how the industry works, man. The industry was built upon making more and more action, and therefore it's like I mean, if I keep on going, right? Hunter x Hunter, Full Alchemist,
Sure.
Tokyo Revengers,
Then let me ask you this, and
Berserk. I forgot about Berserk.
sure. Do you think that anime, manga, light novel, that whole entertainment medium has unique comedic stuff that if you were to translate that to live action or any other
Or let's just say if you were to translate it, if you were to ship it to the West,
sure,
right? Like outside of Japan.
would it slap? Would it hit? Would it resonate?
Comedy in itself is universal. Comedy that makes you laugh, on the other hand, is not. Action is universal because there's less moving parts. I mean, like contradictory to what action is.
Yeah.
There's less moving parts.
You,
to
you
it.
mean it metaphorically,
Yes.
but also literally
from a
because-
production standpoint?
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so it's completely like, I mean, like I'm not arguing with you about this. I'm not trying to disagree with you. I understand where you're coming from. And it's also hard to say like, no, you're wrong, or like, no, this is actually what's happening. It's because of the fact that we have the data here.
Yeah.
Where like,
And I personally feel it. Do you feel that way too?
I think that there is always a place for comedy. It just so happens that that's not what a lot of the executives think.
Yeah, I think comedy should always be sitting at the table of anime genres, but it's sitting more towards the end of the table than at the front
No,
or the center, whatever you want to call it.
yeah. Again, like I still feel that like trying to sort of compartmentalize it is actually kind of mean or derogatory, but I know where you're coming from as well. I know that you're saying it not so much to disregard comedy as a genre, you're more saying that this is how it's been treated within the industry, and that's the shame. And
Yes.
that's where your gripe is.
Because within the same breath, somehow that etchy bathroom comedic scene is supposed to be comedic, just like how that, I don't know, what's a joke that both of us really appreciate in some anime? I don't know, say something quick.
At this point now, you're just
Fuck Dan to Dan.
you're okay. Yeah, like the part where
They have funny faces.
it's not so much that, it's more like, oh, we will now impregnate you to create a new human. What?
Yeah.
Boom, banana penis comes out.
Boom. That's fucking crazy.
Yes. But it took you a while to think about that, right?
Yes, it did
And
take
so
me a while.
and so-
So it's kind of on the back burner.
We're kind of circling back onto whether or not comedy itself is a mistreated genre. And look, it's easy to say yes, it's easy to say no, and it really just comes down to how you view the genre in itself and what you see as working for you within the comedy genre. But the fact is that when you have like top selling manga series that sell over 100 million copies and only one of them is comedy, to be fair, none of them are actually romance. You got One Piece, Doraemon, Go-Go, 13, Case Closed, which is Detective Conan, Dragon Ball, Naruto, Slam Dunk, Tokyo Beat Core, which I'd never heard of, but that ran for like 40 years.
I think if we look at
actually the highest selling romance is Boys Over Flowers. Wow.
Is that a boy love thing?
No, but no. But what? You don't know Hana Yuri Dango? It's like a reverse harem kind of thing.
Sorry. Okay.
I like Boys Over. There's so, and this is the thing too. I think it's also the fact that like with romance, the way that romance works as well is that Asians love that shit. Asians, I mean, that's why like Hana Yuri Dango, which you've never come across, by the way, it's got a Japanese live adaptation, a Korean live adaptation, and I believe a Taiwanese live adaptation.
Oh, I recognize the cover, but I've never read it or watched it before.
And that's where I will give you this on romance. Romance is easier to translate into the big screen, onto live action, because it's easy to find a pretty boy and a pretty girl than to find somebody that doesn't have those qualities but is funny as shit.
Right.
But I refuse to believe and say that comedy is a lesser form or like is treated lesser.
I'm not saying it's a lesser form. I'm saying it's treated lesser.
Yeah, that in itself, I will agree, is a big tragedy. But
you're kind of agreeing slowly getting.
I'm kind of agreeing, but I'm also like, I guess it's futile hope is what it is. But at the same time,
same thing with us with horror, right?
Well, horror, I've just accepted that
really?
horror is not going to ever work. I actually do want to talk to you about this later on.
Let's do a future BP on it. Yeah,
but let's split the script here, right? So
mm-hmm.
we've gone over like what the comedy genre is, why it exists in so many properties, yet it's not very evident that it exists on its own, even though we've listed some really, really good comedy series. What can be done with the comedy genre? What can be done to at least push it higher up, at least in terms of like gain more respect? I don't know. Like, I don't know what the right word is. I'm trying to figure out, like, because I understand like where you're coming from is not completely like derisive, derogatory. I think you're just stating like this is clearly like how the industry views comedy, and it's a shame that that's how it's been treated. So what can be done to elevate comedy on, I guess, a more sort of widespread view, a more sort of universally accepted medium or more accepted genre?
In my opinion, in one word, impossible.
That's a simple answer.
Yeah.
Now the difficult answer.
Now let me explain why. So, as you mentioned, and I also agree, to a great extent, comedy is very subjective, such that maybe a joke hits for you and doesn't hit for me, and then but you find it funny and you're trying to convince me and I'm trying to convince you it's not. But at the end of the day, comedy cannot be enhanced dramatically, at least. Let's say dramatically.
Like there's a limit to how much you can laugh or how much you find something funny.
Yeah, like if I were to give you a gag or a joke, and then
there's an expiration date for that joke,
exactly.
right?
Not only that, but if I were to say with an action scene, oh, it looks this way now, but let me put in $1 million to make it pretty, smooth Sakuga moment, then it will look better. I think it's easier. Romance, I think it would be second fiddle to comedy in that at the end of the day, writing good characters, writing funny premises is not dependent on money.
I think that's what it is, right?
It's dependent on effort.
It's also the same with horror too, right? In the fact that you really need to have good writers to be able to create a sense of dread and despair and horror, or you need to create believable characters that really do resonate a sense of romantic feeling, or you need to have jokes that just slap you on the face and be like, yo, laugh. I'm going to make you laugh right now, and you do fucking laugh. I guess that's why, like, when you say impossible, like, I hate to say, like, oh, it's about there's always a chance, but, like, it becomes harder to argue against it just because of the fact that the metrics just aren't on our side. But I think as a whole, comedy is in a good place. Now, whether or not it means that, like...
Wait, sorry. Did you say it is or it isn't in a good place?
It is in a good place. What I'm thinking is that we're looking at it from, like, whether or not series are on the top of the pedestal, whether we can say, like, oh, this is good. I think in the end, it's just, like you said, it's not that easy to recommend. It's much easier for you to recommend a Demon Slayer than it is Nichijou.
Yes.
Right? And so, but even then, it's like, whether or not, like, something works for somebody else should not necessarily dictate whether or not you feel that comedy is good or not, right?
No, you're correct, but it does, unfortunately, dictate where the industry goes.
Yeah.
So if they don't like, if an executive or whatever, or a studio is like, oh, that doesn't work, but this thing works, and it just so happens that that thing that didn't work is more comedy based.
I mean, like, are you going to create? Okay, are you going to create quote unquote like woke comedy for like the woke mind? Are you going to create comedy that is specifically for like kids? Are you going to create comedy that's like only gags? Are you going to create comedy? Because I think that's the problem. I think that's the problem. That it's not so much that like comedy doesn't work. I think it's just the fact that there's so many forms of it that it inevitably has an identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, you can't have a comedy series that is both ecchi and gag and make it slap. You can't have maybe.
Well, I don't know.
Actually,
when you put it together,
that's prison school.
Yeah,
that's prison
sorry.
School.
Yeah, when you put it like that,
that's Shimoneta, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, fine.
In fact, that's the whole premise of Shimoneta.
Yeah, okay. Ecchi and gag absolutely do work.
Yeah,
but like in terms of like trying to like complement and use every facet of comedy, I think that's where like, unless you are a masterful writer, like it's really hard to pull off. And companies just aren't interested in paying a good writer to write a joke versus a good animation studio to put together one of the craziest, most bombastic Sakuga moments of all time.
I just think that because comedy, and I think I'm just gonna say we agree that it is really hard to do. Hardest or not, I don't know, but it's very hard to do. Unfortunately, if you think about how do we rectify it, right? That's kind of this portion of the discussion. I don't know. If we add more money, that doesn't guarantee things. Of course, it doesn't guarantee action either, but at least I can see the through line, right? Or idol shows. I can kind of see the through line of, well, we just got to make the girls more cuter. We just got to do the choreography better. But then with comedy, though, comedy is so simple and elegant and difficult and bombastic and derivative and generic and timely and what's the opposite of anachronistic? Like if stand-up comedy is just a person holding a microphone talking to an audience to elicit laughter, that is I'm not saying cheap as in it is lesser, as in it is as simple and as clean as it gets in terms of resources that you need to put in. But at the same time, that stand-up comedian can be selling out stadiums or can be like in a bar on a Friday night and no one is there and he's kind of just talking to himself.
I think it's also just the fact that like action, if you remove any of like the extremely violent stuff, it's kind of all ages.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a reason why like you have your Demon Slayers and your One Pieces on the top of the pedestal,
and with
whereas you know, if you're trying to sell primarily to kids, then you're alienating your adult audience, and if you do the inverse, it's the same. Like you're not going to be able to capture all audiences with comedy.
And with romance, okay, minus the hentai and that stuff, a lot of people can really understand it. Okay, if you're like 2 or 3 years old, maybe you won't. But for a lot of people, it's very easy to understand love, drama. I like someone, but he or she likes someone, and that person likes me, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But with comedy, though, it's like, bro, sit down, let me give you 45 minutes of context, then I show you the same thing, and you're supposed to laugh. I mean, the fact that even there is that trope of, I had to explain the joke to you, and then actually that makes it not funny at all. Or once I explain it to you and then you hear it again, it doesn't hit the same as if you understood the context and you heard it the first time. So it's so sensitive.
Yeah, but when you do come across like good comedy, doesn't it just feel a bit more special to you then?
That's why I think it is so good. That's why I think up to this day, we watched Nichijou, right?
Yep.
Like,
well,
together.
I watched like 6 episodes. I don't think I finished it.
I think we watched a good portion of it together.
But I don't think we've ever finished it. I mean, I didn't finish it with you. I'm sure you probably. I don't know.
I don't remember. But the point was, we agree. I think both of us would agree with each other that some of it was drop dead funny, and then some of it was like, what is this? But I would argue,
I could say the same thing with Pop Team Epic as well.
Sure,
like a lot of it was really good, and some of it was just like.
Yeah. But as a whole, I would say Nichijou is the cream of the crop comedy. And that is kind of crazy to say when it is not, quote unquote, perfect. Do you know what I mean? And unfortunately, that is a criteria that
I hate to ask, but like, what is perfect?
Oh, okay.
I know where you're getting at. I know where it's like it just hits the right notes in almost every part, and therefore you say it's perfect. Whereas like if you're able to see like the holes in something, and it really sticks with you to this point, then like,
and it's supposed to be the best of that ilk. That kind of is
well, Nichijou for you, Psyche K for me. But even then, Psyche K, there were still some parts where I was like, they really dragged this part on.
Yeah.
Prison School, though. Oof. Prison School was just hilarity the whole time.
I just think that this is an infinite problem. That in a sense, it's like Ouroboros. You just won't be able to solve it. There'll be good shining moments here and there, as evidenced by the fact that we could name drop quite a lot of series that is genuinely comedy based and genuinely funny for, I would say, a lot of people.
Yeah. I think in the end, like, we just have to agree here that like comedy is deeply personal, deeply subjective. If it wasn't, then like every comedian out there would be making a killing, which is clearly not true.
And every single like ecchi dumbass gag in Isekai number 62 is then therefore everyone is going to laugh their ass off.
Here's the thing, right? Like, this is basically it. You have 1 season of Nichijou, but you have 10 films of Fast and Furious.
Well, okay, wait. No. Name something else that is an anime, because
no, but okay. Well, I mean, it still applies in the sense that like this is obviously a very terrible. Like, why do we need more of this? It's just because that's just what the industry dictates for you. Unfortunately, you could say the same thing with a lot of comedy movies, right? Like Pineapple Express was great for its time, but would I rewatch it? Hard to say because the jokes just don't fit anymore. That's the thing, right? It's like there's a lot less like replayability and replay value for comedy versus an action, because you could.
I mean, that is a very good point.
You could just replay what
like
episode,
on YouTube clip, right?
yeah, where it's like you have like you do have like those gag clips, those funny clips, right? But it's like it still has a slap for you, and if it doesn't, then it doesn't. But like,
or you need the context of, oh, they showed that one scene, but then when they show that scene, it made me remember the episode before this happened, and then they were in that situation, and then I saw that clip. Yeah, that's why it's funny.
Yeah, like there's a scene within Fast and the Furious where
you just have an axe to grind with.
It's just I mean, I hate the series, but there's because it also just keeps on popping up on my my To You feed for Instagram, on YouTube and whatnot. There's a scene where like there's a character in there, and he says something to The Rock, and then The Rock's like, "Oh, you better hide your big ass forehead," and everyone just fucking laughs. And apparently, it's like super funny, but like I don't get it. I don't understand the context behind it. I never really cared for the Fast and Furious, but that clip's been viewed millions and millions and millions of times. That's unfortunately like how comedy can be used and not necessarily achieve like the same level of like widespread appreciation, just because I don't have the context behind why that certain joke was so funny. Whereas like if I see cars go vroom and guns go bang, like, oh, I can see that,
Yeah,
I can understand like why this is supposed to be really cool. Do I like it? That's subjective, right?
Yeah. And generally speaking, when you said cars go vroom and guns go bang, if the gun looks really nice or the car goes really fast, which usually means it needs a bigger engine, which usually means more money needs to be put in it.
Yeah, but I think it's, again, like we've talked about this before, where it's like, regardless of whatever medium, right, live action, anime, and whatnot, you'll always have like stuff that is extremely popular but really low scoring, and stuff that is like super high. It's like, critics' choice versus popular opinion, and whatnot, right? Like, there's obviously going to be comedy series that like are in the high 8s and 9s, but the level of fellowship they have is nowhere near the amount that people have for your Demon Slayers or for your Friarens and whatnot.
Or at least not in the conversation.
Actually, Friaren's a different one because of the fact that it's not only super popular, but it's also super good too.
Yes.
It's still not anywhere close to being in the top like 50 for most followed, but
manga?
Anime.
But it's number 1 on rank, right?
Yeah. That's again, that's a separate discussion.
That's a separate discussion, right? Yeah, I totally get it. But yeah, so
still 9.31. Fuck.
Damn. So ultimately, I mean, how are we doing on time?
We're fine, dude. I mean, like
is there like, do you want to talk more about it?
Or we got another like 15 minutes.
Well, I don't know if we can. It's either like we geek out another 45 minutes, or we kind of wrap it up now.
I mean, what are your what's on your mind right now in terms of like?
Well, I think rather than now talking about the comedy genre, in a sense of an analysis of the genre, I kind of want to ask you, is there a comedic anime that almost cannot work in any other medium? That's sort of what I was trying to say earlier on. For example, no, sorry, go on.
Hard to say, because the ones I do like already have a live action form, and those ones did not work. I think Psyche K had a live action, and it was just like, nah.
But
let me just confirm that.
I think there is a live action Psyche K, right?
No, there isn't. There's a video game, but no, yeah. But that should, yeah. I mean, like, for me, like, that's probably what it is. Psyche K, as an example, works perfect in anime, but it would not work in live action because of the fact that it's got too many sort of supernatural elements, breaking the fourth wall, way too many sort of animated sequences where if you were to do a live action, it's just hard. But same way what you can say about action series. And,
Right. You can't make a sword turn into a fire sword unless if you add CGI, right?
I mean, that's the same gripe that I have with One Piece, despite the fact that people really like. I don't understand why people like the One Piece live action. It looks garbage.
But what I will say though is sometimes I would say anime kind of goes crazy when it comes to comedy. I would think of, for example, the premise of Uma Musume
Oh, yes.
is the most absurd. Like, okay, whether the show you think is comedic or not, I think there are comedic elements, obviously, but the premise of
Horse girls running a track and that being the focal point and people being like, yo, this shit slaps.
yeah, but they're also
Yo, I'm ready to drop like $500 a month on this shit, man.
yeah to do this mega pull, right? But no, but also they're not like horses as in like the animal horse. They're horses, but
They're girls. They're just girls.
Yeah, personified, right? Like that is something that you can't really do any other medium. It just wouldn't hit. It's just impossible.
Prison School's the same. I mean, Dan to Dan live action would also be weird. You were to see a robot just straight up like pull out a penis. It's like, I'm going to impregnate you now. I think that it would not look as good, and I don't think it would hit as hard. But when it's because especially with comedic anime as well, like you have free reign because you know full well that if you're going to be doing comedy, you don't necessarily need to apply it to real life. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily need to be like that sense of relation. That's where I feel like horror does not do well, because like horror is scary, not so much like the jump scares and whatnot. It's just more that like that sense of dread translates to you, right? Like if you were to see like Sadako climbing out of your screen, that would be terrifying. But when you see it as a cartoon, you see it animated, you're like, this doesn't really, I can't really put myself in their shoes anymore. I'm not, I can distance myself and remove myself from that sense of dread. Comedy is kind of the inverse, where it's like, it doesn't have to be based in real life. It could just be completely ridiculous. I mean, dude, like, how many times do you, I mean, like, if you were to see, like, a live action nanny walking around, then a baby puts their finger on their back, and then their head explodes into a rocket. Like Nichijou style.
No, and the laser beam shoots out, right? You're thinking of Aso.
I was actually thinking Nichijou.
Oh, but Asobi Asobase is like that too.
That too. Yes.
Why is that so random? Okay, it's so coincidental.
Okay, there is a scene that would absolutely not slap, which is the girls decide to have an inflatable pool in the classroom.
Oh no, that one is.
And then the teacher starts licking the pool
God,
water.
That is so gross.
That would not fly. But for some reason, it works really well in anime, and so it gives them that freedom to really explore the wacky shit that they want to do. That's why, like, Japanese comedy shows, like those game shows, their clips are fucking gangbusters, man. Like, anytime people do that, you know that game where it's
the
like
Silent Library, and
Silent Library is one of them. The other one, which is like the wall, where they have to like try and make the shape of the wall, otherwise they fall into a pool. That shit slaps, right? That castle one, I forgot what it was called.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah. That one is like classic. You know, just seeing people trying to Takeshi's Castle. That's the one, right?
And then there's like a boulder made of paper mache.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or like there's even ones where it's like they get all these mascots, like local mascots, whether it's from prefectures, from baseball teams. Like, okay, which one of these can run the fastest through a minefield? And they just have this mascot run, and there's just like fireworks and explosions everywhere. And it's just like, time. Okay, that bear is number one now. All right, baseball guy, you're up next. And you're just like, what the fuck is going on?
When I think of comedy, there is an anime. There is one example that I always gravitate to, and it is something that literally cannot be replicated at all in any other medium. And for whatever reason, they also speak English, and that's the English dub of Ghost Stories.
Oh, right.
It is because if you watch the Japanese
That's not
dub,
comedy by purpose, though.
well, for if you listen to the English, it definitely is comedic on purpose.
Goddamn.
But I'm telling you, how is it possible that you took a show that on the surface is not funny. It's really bad. It's like a D tier anime. But then you add in English dub.
That shit got 20 episodes, by the way.
It was hilarious. It is so dumb. It is so good.
You know what's really funny as well? The opening theme is called "Grow Up."
Yeah, I guess they hella did grow up. So, and how can you replicate that? How can you replicate that in live action? How can you replicate that in manga form? You can't, because the English dub, it just no. What's funny?
I'm reading on Wikipedia. The English language dub has received feedback from critics in the field. Screen Rant praised the characters of Ghost Stories and their development as well written, though he wrote that the animation style was a bit dated. However, Backslash Films called the dubbed version of Ghost Stories the best and worst anime dub, describing it as raunchy, wildly inappropriate, and self-aware. So Screen Rant was just like, it was pretty well written. It's a bit old, and I'm bursting out thinking, like, did that person watch the same thing that I did?
No. Slash Films definitely has it on.
Yeah, the bird's like, this is so bad, it's good.
Yeah,
it's not that it's so good that it's bad.
and I just feel that at the craziness of anime absurdity is a unique feature of anime comedy.
Well, I think that's the key word there, unique. I feel that comedy itself is a very deeply personal experience, and therefore, like you said, that's what holds it back from being universally acclaimed, in the fact that you have to have everybody on board, and unless you have that, then you can't say that it has the same staying power as an action or as like the top tier romances. Because yes, romances can be contextual, but generally when you see people fall in love,
you get it.
It's not hard to figure out what's happening.
Yeah,
right?
And it's either
like when you see them kids hold hands for the first time, you're like, oh yeah,
boy.
It's about to happen, and then some misunderstanding happens and they break up, and you're like, fuck, we're back to square one again.
I think comedy in anime and manga is one of those. Okay, I'm just really echoing my stance again.
It's
to
not
wrap up.
It's not tragic as a form. It's tragic in its level of appreciation from the people who make it.
Yeah.
Because you're always going to find comedy that works for you. Like, look, like if I was to like look into the backlog, I can find a comedy series that I will absolutely enjoy. But that's the key. I have to find it. Whereas with action series, that's just thrown at
stick. Yeah.
It's just thrown at me. It's like, ooh, boom. Oh, here we go. Oh, look at that. Dan. Oh, cool. Oh, look, the movies for Demon Slayer is coming out. Boom. Okay, done. That shit's hand fed to you.
Or JJK. Boom. End of story.
Yeah. What's JJK up to right now? Actually, when's their next season coming out or movie? Or whatever it is, because I know that people want more of that shit.
Yeah, I don't know, but Will, I think I've probably have said enough in terms of my stance and how I feel about anime, comedy, and comedy genre in general. Is there anything you want to do to sort of wrap up this discussion before I head on to show notes? I think we will still credit our break music, right?
Yeah, I just realized we didn't go on a break. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think to look at comedy itself and decide whether or not it works as an effective genre is really hard, simply because of the fact that it's been used in so many different facets and forms. I think that's, a blessing yet a curse at the same time. It's a blessing in the sense that you have the ability to create a property and elevate it with a little bit of comedy. Like I said, Dan, the usage of those comedic slapsticks fucking works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like, again, it makes sense to, with the premise, it's a boy looking for his penis and
his balls.
Yes. Oh no, he has his penis. He has no balls.
Yes.
That's it. Yes, other way around. Wow, I can't believe I had to say that. And also, you having Science Saru to back it up as well. Perfect, right? But at the same time, as you mentioned as well, to find a comedy series or even just a comedic episode of anything that stands the test of time is just, counting every grain of sand in the desert. Like, you're never going to be able to get to it just because it's a very deeply personal experience. One thing that makes you laugh is not going to do the same for another. And there's nothing more embarrassing than saying, yo, check this. This is so funny, man. And after 50 seconds of watching it, nobody laughs. You're like, yeah, I'll show myself out now. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Whereas, like, you can just pull up, like, episode 19, is it, of Demon Slayer? And it's just like,
season 1,
yo, this is cool. What is this? This is an anime? Oh, I'll check it out. Yeah.
Yeah. You never look at a joke and then go, oh, that makes me want to watch the show. Usually,
dude, there are so many times when I've seen some real funny shit on Instagram or on YouTube, and I want to share it to people, but I only share it to people who I know have the same sense of humor, or I know I appreciate the same thing. I can't blast that shit in a group and be like, this is the funniest shit I ever heard, because that is really easy to make a pariah out of yourself and just be like outed. Like, no, you're a fucking witch. Like, to the stake with you, you know?
Martyrdom.
Yeah.
Drop a nade.
Whereas this cool. Look, I don't care for Pacific Rim, but if I watched a sequence
I love Pacific Rim.
But if I watched a sequence for it, I would be like, yo, this shit's fucking awesome.
Pacific Rim is great. The first one, at least.
That was Del Toro, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, like, as an aside, just to end on my side,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it keeps on popping up on my Instagram. They keep showing this clip of Del Toro going to Japan and meeting fans and whatnot, and then you're like, "Oh, Del Toro, we have Mr. Guillermo. We have a surprise for you." It's like, "Oh, what is it?" So we built a real life Gundam here, right? It's like, okay, because he's Mexican. He's like, "Oh, I want to see this."
QUE, yeah.
Yeah, I want to see it. They bring it to him, and he's just like staring in awe the whole time, just like on the verge of tears. So he fucking loves the Gundam series, and then they made it so that like the Gundam moves and looks at him and talks to him and whatnot. He's just like, this is one of the best days of my life, and I'm like, Del Toro knows his shit. I'm not a huge Gundam fan, but like, hey, game recognized game. When you find something you love and you see it in person, bruh, that stuff, you can't bottle it and sell it. You got to keep it to yourself, and that's what comedy is as well. Like, comedy, you cannot expect that other people are going to appreciate the jokes and the laughs as much as you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same with horror, same with suspense, same with fantasy, and same with romance. Action is just different.
Yeah,
like you can't argue with it. Action succeeds, also fails, but it's just always on the top billing for anime, for manga, for live action, for games.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why there's no comedy games.
Yeah. I mean,
because that shit just doesn't work.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. Let's not talk about anime and manga comedic ones.
But you can find, right, like dating sims, you can find like reverse harem games.
I mean, you know about Hatoful Boyfriend, right?
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's for those who don't know, Hatoful Boyfriend is a parody of dating. Is a dating sim game that's a parody of dating sims, and you date pigeons. You date pigeons.
It's self-aware and dumb, but it's also like the perfect commentary of what the dating sim scene is like.
And if you were to show that to someone that is not really exposed to anime, it would be like, what the fuck are this? What is this? Why is it funny?
So where do we stand with comedy then? Do you see another comedy series coming out that would give you the same laughs, the same slap as Nichijou? Or do you feel that, like, because of how personal experience Nichijou was for you in terms of its jokes, execution, its overall presentation, that it's just not fair to compare it to anything else because it's a very deeply unique experience for you?
So, again, I'm excluding shows where comedy is used as a supporting role,
as a conveyor belt for other things to
and
come,
a variant, even if the comedy elements in, like, for example, in Konosuba is really good. Like, if we exclude those and focus more on something that I think both of us would agree is more comedic. So obviously Kaguya-sama is comedic, but I would argue the romance stuff is also, if not neck and neck, superior than the comedy in terms of the genre.
I mean, considering how good the writer is, Akasaka, like, I would absolutely see that he'd be able to switch that comedy into drama.
Yeah, easily. So, but that being said, it's so hard to sort of figure out what comedy can work. I don't, I mean, part of my whole stance, this whole episode is comedy is seen as lesser, even though it shouldn't be. And there's not a lot of really universally good ones, few and far between, even though I think there should be more, there needs to be more, and that sucks and that's tragic. And also because you can't throw money at it or you can't throw resources at it and expect it to dramatically improve. Just like how, but unlike how, for example, action is, where you can throw stuff at it and eventually you kind of will get it right. I just think comedy on its own has no legs, but everyone relies on comedy. So it's kind of like no one it's like at dinner table, no one acknowledges it, but you can't leave the dinner table because they all need you. But none of them are willing, like all the other genres aren't willing to admit to one another that actually comedy is valued by everyone. And the fact that no one is willing to say that out loud.
I wouldn't say it's it's.
I'm turning that metaphor,
No,
but
it's not so much that it's not. I think it's just underappreciated because of the fact that there's so many comedy series that just don't work out, right? Like I think it's just it's like a quick buck that you can make, whether or not you actually end up making that buck or not.
And I think that is inherently one of the best and worst parts of comedy, is because it's easy to incorporate, but it's hard to master. So therefore, people look at it differently than other things.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I can think of in terms of elevating the experience of comedy is just you just have to find you have to find good writers. And not just like one writer to do everything. I think you just have to understand that, like, as things change, that either that writer is aware enough to figure out how to mold the level of comedy, or you just have to bring in new writers to try and transcend experiences from the past. Now, that's of course easier said than done, because if it was easy, it'd be done now, and clearly it has not worked out.
I got the solution, Will. I figured it out. How to save comedy, okay? We have to connect and tether all of our minds such that we become one mind.
That's AI, okay?
Then once we become one mind...
That's DeepSeek, that's OpenAI.
Sure. We all got to be connected and wired together as one being, and then we find a joke. And then we will have achieved greatness.
Yeah, so there was a South Park episode that had that, where it was a robot that was able to collectively analyze every single joke and figure out what worked best for everybody.
And what was the answer?
Well, it was actually not all that funny, because people have a very, very low sense of humor in the world of South Park.
Okay.
I mean, the fact that you can fart in someone's face and everybody thinks it's funny, that's
sure.
I mean, it's totally humor, right?
Yes.
That robot ends up becoming Hitler.
Oh my God, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That's
and
terrible.
tries to exterminate everybody, and because it's reached a point where, like, there's a plateau in comedy where, like, you can never go beyond that point anymore, and nothing is funny anymore, and that's it. Like, once you've reached the ultimate point of comedy, that's it. And then I think that kind of encapsulates what you're saying, where it's just like there's only so much you can do to make someone laugh before they no longer laugh anymore.
Yep. But
I wasn't expecting to throw a South Park reference in today, but hey, here we are.
I also wasn't expecting us to have that fervor of a discussion, but here we are. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Good Anime Palette podcast. If you want, we greatly appreciate leaving a ratings or review on your podcast listening platform of choice. You can reach us through our email, gapalette@gmail.com, GAPALETTE, all lowercase, all one word, using the handle @PaletteGood, capital P and capital G, all one word. We have a website, www.goodanimepalette.com, all lowercase, all one word. Music credits for this episode. Our intro music is Life is a Party by John Runefelt. Our break music, which we didn't play, but we're credit nonetheless, is Chemistry Love by Swift7. And our outro music is Voyage by Pow. You can support the music artists that we feature by listening to them on Spotify, Apple Music, or your music listening platform of choice. And Epidemic Sound provides all of our royalty-free music. If you're interested, you can sign up using the referral link in our show description. Terms and conditions apply.
So I actually just had a quick look on Reddit. I just typed in, why is comedy so unappreciated? And the first response, which I think is pretty much encapsulating what we discussed, was comedy is a very subjective genre. So that while one group could find a movie or actor hilarious, this is in relation to like IRL, but you can apply it to anime as well. There is most likely another group of the same size that thinks the opposite. Most comedies, good or bad, these days tend to be a bit lowbrow, so I doubt most awards organizations would give them the light of day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of checks out.
I mean, I don't remember there ever being like a comedy movie that won the Oscars.
Maybe like an actor or an actress, but not
For their performance.
Yeah,
as
for their
opposed to-
performance.
as opposed to what the actual movie is.
yeah,
right?
definitely not like a best movie. I don't think so. But Golden Globes has the best comedy category, so by definition,
It has to win something.
yeah,
right?
exactly, right? Oh man, I didn't expect our discussion for the comedy genre to be that heated and intense.
It wasn't so much that it was heated. It was more just the fact that like we have very differing understandings of how comedy is perceived, but it boils down to the same thing, in that it is clearly a very underappreciated genre, and it's really hard to figure out what the right move for it is, or if there even is a right move. If comedy really does exist to just be a conveyor for other genres that succeed or do better. Right, like I said, right, like comedy in Dan makes Dan what it is, but at the same time, it's also just used to sort of elevate the thrills of the showy performances of what Dan is. You could, I suppose, take the comedy out. It wouldn't be the same thing, but you could make it work. It might not be as good, but the action is there to stay. The comedy, on the other hand, it's like, I mean, do you remember more the jokes of Dan, or do you remember more the sumo fight where they enter the grandma's house for the first time and the guy just claps every single time? Like, that fight was fucking dope.
I'm just thinking of Turbo Granny.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was a really good episode.
Give me your penis.
Yeah, that too. Okay, yeah.
I'm saying that to you, Jason.
Okay. Oh, Jesus.